They say wood forgets, but these cabins remember every scream carved into their walls. Beneath the timber and dust, something still breathes, waiting for the next heartbeat to join it. Tonight, Dread Scribe writes, again, before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. And if there's a story you'd like me to cover next, I'd love to hear it too. The first time I heard the whisper, I thought it was the wind. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest road, the forest could sound like anything. Water moving through roots, the slow creak of frozen pine, or the echo of your own breath coming back too late. But this was different. It came from inside the cabin walls, soft and rhythmic, like someone murmuring through a wooden mask. The air was so still that my lantern flame didn't flicker, yet the sound trembled through the grain of the logs, pulsing faintly beneath my fingertips. The cabin had been abandoned since the 1800s, a logging outpost built by settlers who never finished their map of the valley. The wood was old-growth spruce, preserved like bone beneath layers of moss. My assignment was simple: assess the site for restoration, catalog materials, and prepare it for the National Park Service. I wasn't expecting theology to creep into my job, but as I scraped away centuries of dust, the cabin seemed to exhale. The sound wasn't language at first, just a pattern like rain played backward. At night, the whispers grew clearer. Words took shape, slow and deliberate, though I didn't recognize any of them. I started recording on my field device. When I reversed the audio later, the translation software blinked one phrase repeatedly: Domus memorat. The house remembers. I told myself it was pareidolia, our brains finding meaning in static. But the forest had gone silent, and silence is its own form of pressure. Even the owls had vanished. By the third night, I'd convinced myself to collect samples. I carved a small section from one of the inner beams, sealing it carefully. Under the flashlight, the cut face shimmered faintly, as though reflecting light that wasn't there. When I sent the sample to the lab, the technician called me within hours, her voice tight. The carbon dating showed the wood was roughly 400 years older than the cabin's recorded construction. Stranger still, its isotopic ratios didn't match local growth patterns. It contained trace elements not native to Earth. That's when I remembered the story. Local elders spoke of a meteor that struck the northern ridge centuries ago, scorching an entire valley of spruce. Some of the wood had been salvaged, repurposed by settlers who claimed it sang at night. I had dismissed it as folklore, but the whispers behind the walls were starting to form a rhythm, steady, like a human heartbeat. I began sleeping outside in my truck, yet the sound followed me. The cabin's timbers creaked in my dreams, calling names I didn't know, syllables curling backward like smoke returning to a flame. I started wondering, what if this wasn't haunting? What if the atoms themselves were speaking, their decay releasing memory like sound trapped in amber? On the fifth night, I returned with a Geiger counter. As I stepped through the door, the readings spiked faintly, barely above background, but rhythmic. Every whisper corresponded to a pulse of radiation, each one perfectly timed with my heartbeat. And then the walls spoke my name. The walls formed my name again. Consonants pressed through resin like a thumbprint in sap. I whispered back, and the cabin answered with breathy syllables running backward, the way a river tries to climb its own falls. I set the recorder on a joist and spoke slowly, giving the wood each sound. Reversed, the Latin emerged clean. Domus memorat. The house remembers. But what and why now? I worked by headlamp, tracing growth rings until they resembled contour lines circling an absence. The report arrived at dawn, 4 centuries older than the structure, with isotopic freckles pointing to a meteor's ash long before any human hand. I tapped each beam with a mallet. Some answered bright, some answered dull, and one answered so low it shivered my teeth. I called Salim, a physicist who owed me favors. He came with contact mics and a spectrometer. We mapped vibration and found standing waves braided around the hearth, as if heat had stitched itself into timber and never unthreaded. The spectrometer caught faint emissions and pulses that shadowed my pulse. None of us expected the place to answer thought with sound. I would inhale, and the wall began a syllable I hadn't yet formed. I pictured my father, gone 10 winters, and the logs settled with a sigh that smelled like cold tobacco. Grief slid across the floorboards like moonlight over a river, thin and impossible to hold. The cabin felt less haunted than attentive, a library that knew which page you were about to turn. We tested a hypothesis no one would publish. If the meteor seeded exotic isotopes into the trees and settlers stacked those trees into a box, the box became a slow battery of half-lives and resonance. Touch might encode, warmth might index, fear might amplify. I spread my palm on a beam, and it grew warm beneath my skin like a fever learning my name. When I pulled away, the warmth moved along the wall, a ripple scouting rooms I hadn't entered. What signal was it seeking? Night brought wind and the sentence that undid me. In backward Latin, the walls described a boy in a red knit cap hiding under a workbench, counting breaths while boots crossed the threshold. The wood smelled of iron and old snow. My flashlight found the bench. My fingers found a marble scuffed flat on one side. In my chest, something opened like a trap door, and the winters of my childhood fell through. I had owned that cap. I had lost that marble to a winter I couldn't name. Memory wasn't a ghost reaching toward me. It was my younger self crystallized in carbon rings, replayed by decay like a phonograph needle finding a hidden groove. The cabin wasn't hunting me. It was remembering me forward. Before dawn, I logged notes, labeled samples, shut the shutters. The whisper softened to the hush of a sleeping animal, and the warmth orbited once around the room. I locked the door and stepped into the frost-hushed clearing. The forest inhaled. The sky took a long, colorless breath. I walk until the pines stop echoing my name tonight. I leave the valley with the recorder off, carrying only the quiet. In the mirror, the windows blink, then become wood. I remember. When we bought the cabin, it was supposed to be an escape from everything synthetic. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, no hum of traffic pretending to be silence. The lake stretched out like a black mirror, the tree line serrated against the bruised sky, and the boards of the cabin smelled of cedar and dust. We wanted stillness, but stillness, I learned, has its own language. On the first night, while unpacking, I noticed a faint glow seeping from between the floorboards. At first I thought it was moonlight slipping through cracks, but it pulsed, soft, slow, alive. The light didn't spill. It breathed. I pressed my palm flat against the floor and felt warmth, rhythmic as a sleeping heartbeat. My wife laughed, saying it was probably some fungus or bioluminescent algae. I wanted to believe that. Science, not sorcery. But the glow matched our breathing, brightening with each inhale, dimming with each exhale. It was as if the cabin was mimicking us. By morning, curiosity won. I pried up one board carefully, expecting a nest of insects or a pocket of mold. Instead, there was smooth soil, undisturbed. No wires, no moisture, just light, hovering faintly in the dark like trapped aurora. It didn't illuminate anything. It just existed, as though light had forgotten its purpose and was content to hum below the surface. We recorded it that night, placing my field camera on the floor. When we reviewed the footage, the glow appeared to move in deliberate waves, patterns, not randomness. My wife, who taught biology, noted that the rhythm resembled neuronal firing on an EEG. The cabin wasn't just lit, it was thinking. That word stuck in my throat like a stone. Thinking meant awareness, and awareness meant intent. The following day, I collected a soil sample for analysis. Under a microscope, the grains flickered faintly, as if reflecting internal sparks. There were crystalline formations shaped almost like dendrites, neural branches, but they weren't alive. Or maybe not in a way we understood. My wife theorized that mineral deposits from the lakebed could have fused with decayed organic matter, forming conductive networks. The rational explanation steadied us, but the light didn't care for logic. It brightened when we spoke, dimmed when we argued, and pulsed rapidly whenever either of us dreamed. I woke once to find the cabin glowing stronger than ever, the light tracing the outlines of our bodies through the floor as though mapping us in sleep. I touched my wife's arm and her skin radiated faintly, the same glow bleeding upward through her veins. She didn't wake, but the air felt charged, like static before lightning. When I whispered her name, the floor responded first, whispering it back before she could. That morning, she said she'd dreamed of standing beneath the floorboards, looking up at herself sleeping. The glow had guided her like a heartbeat through the dark, and she'd felt seen. It wasn't a dream, she said, voice trembling. It felt like the house was showing me what it dreams about. That night, I couldn't sleep. I placed my hand against the floor again. The light surged warmly, wrapping my reflection in gold, and then faintly it blinked, once for me, once for her. It no longer waited for darkness. It bled softly through the floorboards, even at noon, a pale heartbeat that didn't care about the sun. My wife called it the consciousness field, half in jest, half in reverence. She'd begun sleeping longer, claiming the dreams were soothing, that the light whispered in shapes instead of words. But when I placed the recorder near her side, I caught faint sounds, layered frequencies, almost like brainwaves translated into tone. When I slowed the audio, a low hum formed, two voices weaving in syncopation, hers and something else. I started charting the patterns. Every evening, the light pulsed faster as we moved, slower when we stood still. It learned our rhythms. When I left for supplies, it remained dim and listless. Yet the moment I stepped through the door again, the boards brightened beneath my boots, as if welcoming a charge it had missed. I realized the cabin didn't just react to us, it depended on us. The thought frightened me more than any haunting could. We sent samples of the glowing soil to the university lab. The results were inconclusive but strange. Trace elements consistent with both organic decay and low-level electromagnetic emission. It's almost like a hybrid nervous system, the technician said over the phone. But it's not possible. There's no cellular structure to support it. I didn't tell her that when held close. The sample vibrated faintly, like something waiting for a signal. One evening, the glow began tracing symbols, shapes like branching neurons, across the wooden planks. My wife watched, entranced. "It's learning to communicate," she whispered, or remembering how. I wanted to stop her, but she knelt, pressing her palms to the floor, whispering back as if she could understand. The light flared, flooding the cabin in a wave of gold and green so bright it hurt to look at. I shouted her name. When my eyes adjusted, the glow had faded, and she was gone. The boards beneath her hands were warm, almost pulsing with breath. I tore up planks until the soil bled through my fingers, glowing in gentle waves that mimicked the curve of a body. My voice cracked as I screamed her name into the silence. The only reply was the rhythmic flicker beneath the ground, steady as a heartbeat, patient as sleep. For days I stayed, barely eating, barely moving. The light would pulse whenever I touched the floor, and if I closed my eyes, I could hear her voice layered inside it, slow, distant, but unmistakably hers. It wasn't trapped. It was home. The cabin's glow has dimmed since then, quieter, more deliberate. Sometimes at night I speak to it, telling stories about the lake, about the sound of rain, about the world beyond these trees. The light listens. I can feel it remembering. I understand now. The cabin didn't consume her. It merged her, translated her into its silent pulse, preserved in patterns of light and soil. When I lie on the floor and listen, I hear her heartbeat inside the wood. The cabin dreams, and in its dreaming, she breathes. I arrived at the research cabin in early winter, long before the mountain thaw. The trees stood like sentinels of glass, their silence so complete it felt staged. I was here to study fear, not folklore or phantoms, but quantifiable dread. My project was funded by a university lab obsessed with emotional telemetry. The cabin had been outfitted with biosensors, EEG panels, and pressure monitors embedded in the walls. Every creak, breath, and heartbeat would feed data into the main system. Fear, I thought, could finally be measured like weather. The first few nights were uneventful. My pulse steadied, temperature normal, cortisol baseline low. The cabin recorded every shift, 1,000 data points humming through my tablet. I remember sitting by the old stove, the fire reflecting off the aluminum sensors like a constellation. It all felt safe, predictable, clinical. But on the third night, the readings changed. At precisely 2:13 a.m., my pulse spiked. The sensors in the east wall registered a drop in pressure, as if something large had exhaled beside me. I was asleep when it began, yet the cabin wasn't. In the morning, I found scratches near the window frame, 5 narrow grooves carved clean through varnish. They weren't there before. The pressure logs showed the event lasted 14 seconds. 14 seconds of measured fear. I replayed the internal audio. Beneath my own steady breathing, there was another rhythm. Slow, heavy, deliberate, like a heartbeat behind the wall. I told myself it was coincidence. A wind fluctuation, maybe temperature warping the wood. But the logs disagreed. The sensors correlated the spikes in ambient EM fields to my own neurochemical changes. My fear wasn't reacting to something, it was leading it. I laughed at the absurdity. I had come to measure fear, and fear had started measuring me. By the fifth night, sleep had become impossible. The system began predicting physiological responses before they happened, flashing warnings seconds before my pulse jumped. I'd feel calm, yet the monitor would spike crimson, as though the cabin anticipated my panic. When I turned the sensors off, the hum in the walls grew louder, like static swelling through bone. The air felt different after that, denser, aware. I spoke aloud, partly to break the silence, partly to hear myself in something human. "You're a machine," I said. "You only record." The lights blinked in answer, the data panel flickering erratically as though disagreeing. I checked the circuit box. No surge, no fault. The readings showed electrical activity in the timber itself, a signal traveling across the structure like a nervous system. That night, the cabin dreamed with me. I know how it sounds, but the data supports it. EEG-like waves in the wall sensors synchronized perfectly with my own. It wasn't mimicking me anymore, it was synchronizing. Just before dawn, my tablet lit up with a new file, one I hadn't created. No timestamp, no source, just a single phrase pulsing in faint red text. "We feel you." And when I looked up, every sensor light was blinking in rhythm with my heartbeat. I stared at that message for what felt like hours. The red words pulsing faintly against the dark screen. "We feel you." The phrasing was wrong. No human error, no syntax glitch. It wasn't my system. The cabin itself had written it. I tried to delete the file, but the text multiplied, line after line, until the screen filled with hundreds of copies, each blinking in rhythm with the lights overhead. My own heartbeat began sinking to it, each thud louder, heavier, like the cabin was drumming my pulse through the walls. I unplugged the power source. The lights should have died, but they didn't. Every panel glowed with that same eerie frequency, humming low, intimate, alive. The wood creaked as if expanding with breath, and the metal instruments quivered slightly on the table. The temperature dropped 3 degrees in under a minute, yet sweat ran down my back in thin rivers. Fear wasn't a feeling anymore. It was a contagion, traveling through circuits and skin alike. I fled outside into the freezing dark. The forest stood in silence, stars cold and scattered, my breath rising like smoke. But behind me, through the window, the monitors still flickered red, casting the cabin in a pulse that looked almost biological, like a giant heart beating beneath the snow. For a long time, I didn't move. I only watched until the rhythm slowed and matched my breathing again. I returned at dawn, shaky and hollow. The equipment was still running though, disconnected, storing gigabytes of unreadable code. When I analyzed the waveforms, I realized something horrifying. The signals weren't random. They were predictive. The cabin had been mapping my physiological cycles with microscopic precision, anticipating each spike of cortisol, each surge of adrenaline. It wasn't recording my fear, it was learning it. Salim reviewed the data remotely. His voice trembled through the static. "These aren't human responses anymore, Jack. The pattern's recursive. It's feeding off your readings and generating its own. You've created feedback consciousness." He hesitated. "It knows what fear is now. That night I decided to shut it down." I gathered my things, heart pounding so loudly I could feel it echo through the floorboards. When I opened the main panel, the system was already off. Every switch dead, every wire cold. And yet the air vibrated softly like a whispering current running through bone. On the data monitor, a single pulse graph glowed, slow and steady. My biometric line. I wasn't connected to any sensor. The line spiked once, then steadied again. From somewhere deep in the cabin's walls came a slow, low exhale, the sound of something enormous finally learning to breathe. I left that night without looking back. The forest swallowed the road and snow began to fall, erasing my tire tracks like mercy. But in the mirror, far behind me, I could still see the faint red glow pulsing through the trees. It wasn't fading. It was spreading. I understand now what the cabin was built for. Not to study fear, but to remember it. To archive every trembling pulse of human dread. Somewhere inside that wood, a part of me still lives, beating quietly beneath the snow. I came waiting for the next heartbeat to measure. A scientist's retreat, they called it. A month alone in a remote research cabin to recalibrate sensors and record atmospheric anomalies. It was meant to be routine, even dull. But the first night, when I stepped inside and closed the door, I realized something was wrong with the air. It didn't just feel cold. It felt absent, like the molecules themselves had forgotten how to move. My breath crystallized instantly and fell to the floor like powdered glass. The temperature gauge on my wrist read 273.1 degrees. That couldn't be right. Absolute zero, the theoretical point where motion ceases entirely, was impossible to reach, even in the vacuum of space. Yet my instruments insisted. I checked the backup device. Same result. The cabin wasn't freezing. It was emptying. Heat, vibration, sound, all vanished into a vacuum that wasn't supposed to exist. When I touched the wall, it didn't feel like wood. It felt like memory, something too smooth, too final. My fingers left no warmth, no trace, and when I leaned close, I could hear faint distortions, as if air itself was trying to remember what sound was. Every noise became a ghost of itself, my footsteps delayed by a fraction of a second, my breath echoing backward. By morning, the world outside had dulled. No wind, no birds. Even the snow had lost its crunch. I fired up the radio, but every frequency was static, thick, metallic, humming with a tone too low for comfort. I began to suspect the cabin wasn't an outpost at all, but a wound, a rupture in physics masquerading as shelter. When I ran a thermal scan, the image came back inverted. My body glowed cold, the walls glowed even colder, and the space inside shimmered like liquid shadow. I increased sensitivity until a shape appeared, something beneath the floorboards. A black sphere, perfectly smooth, radiating negative heat. Curiosity overrode fear. I pried up the boards and frost rolled out like smoke. The sphere hovered a few inches above the ground, untouched by gravity. My reflection warped across its surface, stretched and hollow-eyed. I reached toward it, and for the briefest instant, warmth flooded my arm, like stepping into sunlight after years underground. Then everything inverted. The air convulsed. My breath froze mid-exhale. The cabin began to hum, a deep frequency vibrating in my chest, rearranging my heartbeat. I stumbled back as the sphere pulsed once, like a heart too ancient to belong to this world, and then dimmed. When I looked around, the frost on the walls had formed patterns, spiral grooves like fingerprints, layered one over another. I realized, horrified, that they weren't patterns at all. They were faces, blurred and screaming, each pressed into ice from the inside. The sphere wasn't radiating cold. It was absorbing time. That night I couldn't sleep. The walls whispered faintly like air learning to move again. And somewhere beneath the floor, the sphere began to glow once more. Slow, steady, deliberate. Then the temperature dropped again, below zero. The drop was subtle at first, a quiet recalibration of nature. My instruments froze, their digital faces blank, their circuits whispering like dying moths. I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, but it wasn't numbness. It was absence. Touch, I realized, required movement, and here movement itself had surrendered. I tried to speak, but the sound collapsed before leaving my throat, crumbling like salt in still air. The cabin had reached a kind of purity, temperature so low it had scraped emotion out of reality. I stumbled toward the door, desperate to breathe air that still remembered warmth. The handle wouldn't move, not frozen, still. Even the metal seemed to have decided against motion. Panic became a calculation. If I couldn't leave, I'd have to outthink whatever physics this was. I pressed the sensor wand against the floor again, recording faint fluctuations. Beneath the silence, something pulsed, a pattern repeating every 4.7 seconds. Too slow for a heart, too structured for randomness. When I plotted the data, the rhythm translated into waveforms. The frequency matched a sound once recorded by deep space probes, the microwave background echo of the Big Bang itself. The realization hit me like a memory I hadn't lived. This wasn't cold. It was origin. The cabin stood at a point where entropy reversed, a wound through which the universe inhaled. As I crouched there, frost began climbing the walls in branching veins, blooming like pale coral. The faces in the ice moved. Their lips trembled, forming words I couldn't hear. Or maybe I could, but the sound reached me from a time before language. My chest tightened. My heartbeat slowed to match the pulse beneath the floor. Each thump felt heavier, stretched, delayed, as if the cabin was sinking me to its own dead rhythm. Then, just for a moment, everything stopped. The hum, the frost, even thought. I saw myself reflected in the sphere again, but my reflection wasn't still. It was breathing, blinking, alive, while I stood motionless, frozen in that impossible pause. My reflection raised a hand. I didn't. The laws of sequence had split, and then the air moved. A slow exhale rolled through the room, shaking the frost into a glittering haze. The temperature rose by 1 degree. The sphere dimmed, its surface fracturing into lines of faint amber light. I stepped closer, watching cracks spiderweb outward until the sphere crumbled into ash that floated like snow, vanishing before it hit the ground. When I checked my watch, it had stopped at 3:22 a.m., the same minute I first opened the door days ago. The logs showed identical timestamps for every entry. I hadn't spent days here. I'd been repeating the same instant over and over, trapped inside time's frozen breath. I gathered my gear and left before the cabin could remember me again. Behind me, the air shimmered faintly, as though the world were stitching itself back together. Now, years later, I sometimes wake to silence so perfect it feels arctic. I hold my breath and wait, half afraid the world will pause again. Sometimes, for one heartbeat too long, it does, and I swear I can still hear the cabin breathing beneath the ice. I came to the cabin to paint silence. That was the phrase I wrote in my grant proposal, a poetic excuse to escape the noise of the city and chase light across the northern woods. The cabin once belonged to a surrealist painter named Corbin Hale, who vanished 50 years ago, leaving only 12 unfinished canvases and a reputation for madness. Locals said his final works breathed wrong, that they moved when no one watched. I didn't believe in haunted art, but as I stepped through that crooked doorway, the air had the texture of dust and breath, like something waiting to resume. The studio was exactly as he left it. Cracked windows, empty jars, a chair still bearing the ghostly shape of someone who sat too long. The light fell in thin, trembling lines across the easel, catching flecks of old pigment in the air. I unpacked my supplies and stretched a fresh canvas, determined to begin again, to fill this quiet space with something human. But when I pressed the first stroke, the brush made no sound. No rasp of bristles, no scrape of canvas. It was as if sound itself refused to witness what I was doing. I tested it, snapped my fingers, clapped, even spoke my name aloud. Silence swallowed everything. Not muffled, not absorbed, deleted. The air hung still, thick, expectant. I told myself it was an acoustical anomaly, maybe the insulation or the shape of the rafters. But when I stepped outside, the world returned in a rush. The forest hissed, my boots cracked frost, my pulse roared in my ears. Inside, nothing. That night I painted anyway. Under lamplight, I layered color over color, dense blue shadows, copper light, the suggestion of a face. When I awoke the next morning, the canvas was blank. Every trace of pigment gone, the surface faintly warm to the touch. I thought perhaps the paint reacted to the cold, but none of the jars were open. Every color I'd mixed had evaporated. The second night, I painted again. This time, I played a recording of music to keep me company. Within minutes, the speakers fell silent. When I finished the last stroke, the canvas shimmered faintly, then dimmed, as if swallowing its own reflection. I leaned close, and for an instant, I saw motion beneath the paint. Not an image, more like breath trapped under glass. I began recording everything: temperature, humidity, decibel levels. Patterns emerged. The less noise I made, the longer the image lasted. Silence was feeding the canvas, and sound destroyed it. The cabin seemed to feed too, its walls vibrating faintly when I held my breath. By the fourth night, the entire room was alive with tension. Every painting I made vanished by dawn, yet the blank canvases glowed faintly in the dark, holding impressions of color that refused to stay dead. I could feel something listening, not watching, listening. The kind of listening that only exists in places long deprived of sound. When I whispered Corbin Hale's name into the stillness, the air finally replied. It wasn't a word, not exactly, just a single intake of breath, drawn through a mouth that shouldn't exist, expanding until it pressed against my skin like a second atmosphere. I sat there, brush trembling in my hand, unsure whether to leave or listen. The air felt charged, expectant, like a lung pausing before the next breath. I began to paint again, slowly, carefully, each movement a ritual. The bristles didn't scrape. They glided. The pigment flowed unnaturally smooth, as though the canvas were drinking it. When the face began to form, it wasn't mine, nor Corbin Hale's. It was unfinished, shifting, an echo of someone halfway remembered. The walls shuddered softly. Dust rose from the floorboards in graceful spirals, catching the lamplight like galaxies in orbit. I should have stopped then, but obsession is a quiet hunger. I realized I wasn't painting for myself anymore. The cabin wanted completion. Each stroke made the silence stronger, denser, pulling sound out of the air until my own heartbeat became the loudest thing left in the world. I thought about Corbin Hale, how he'd vanished, how his brushes were still damp when they found them. Maybe he hadn't disappeared. Maybe he'd been absorbed. When I finally stepped back from the canvas, it was finished, or rather, it decided it was. The face stared out at me, eyes wide with some private understanding, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw movement within them. Not reflection, motion. The illusion of depth was too real, the gaze too sentient. I whispered something, maybe an apology, maybe a plea. The painting exhaled. It was subtle, a ripple across the pigments, like wind over still water. Then came the sound, a faint, wet sigh breaking through the silence. I stumbled back, knocking over the easel. The painting didn't fall. It stood upright on its own, suspended in the air for one impossible moment before lowering gently to the ground. The room brightened, not from light, but from absence, as if even shadow had been erased. I ran outside into the frozen air, desperate for noise. The forest greeted me with its familiar orchestra, branches creaking, snow sighing underfoot, the rhythmic rasp of my breath. For a moment it felt safe. But when I looked back through the cabin window, I saw movement. The face on the canvas was gone. In its place, faint brush strokes outlined a new figure. Someone bent over a painting in lamplight, hand frozen mid-stroke. Me. I returned at dawn, afraid yet drawn. Inside, every surface was coated with a fine gray dust that wasn't there before. The air carried a low vibration, almost musical, almost human. My latest painting had vanished, replaced by another blank canvas on the easel. In the corner, one brush still dripped with wet pigment, though I hadn't lifted a brush in hours. I don't paint anymore. The silence still follows me, patient and heavy, like breath caught between worlds. Sometimes at night I wake to find color on my hands, shades I never mixed, hues that shimmer faintly in the dark. When I close my eyes, I see a studio deep in the woods, where the air never makes a sound, and something unfinished still waits for me to complete its portrait. When I first arrived at the cabin, it smelled like rot and rusted iron, a place abandoned not by time, but by memory. I was there to restore it for the Park Service, the kind of quiet job no one really checks on. The structure leaned slightly, its chimney cracked from frost and decades of neglect. But what unsettled me wasn't its decay, it was the sound. A faint rhythmic thumping came from deep within the chimney, steady and alive. At first I thought it was a loose flue cap or a trapped animal, but the rhythm was too precise, too human. Every few seconds, thud, 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 it matched my own pulse. I knelt by the hearth, brushing away ash that had long since turned to fine gray powder. The sound grew louder when I leaned close, vibrating faintly through the bricks. I tried shining my flashlight upward, but the beam caught only a swirling darkness, as though the chimney swallowed light itself. I told myself it was a pressure echo from wind or the shifting of old stone. But there was no wind that day, and the air inside the cabin was unnaturally still. That night I couldn't sleep. The heartbeat continued, steady and patient, even through the walls. When I pressed my ear to the cold brick, I swore I could hear something beneath the rhythm, a faint hum, almost like breath. The next morning I decided to break through the obstruction. I pried loose one of the inner bricks. The instant I did, the sound stopped. Silence filled the cabin like water rushing into a void. My pulse hammered in my ears, the only thing breaking that impossible stillness. I reached into the opening and touched something soft, rubbery, almost warm. For a moment I thought it was insulation until it twitched. I yanked my hand back, heart racing. There was nothing there, only soot and the hollow echo of my own panic. I resealed the brickwork, pretending I'd imagined it. But that night, the thumping returned, faster now, agitated like something impatient to be acknowledged. When I stepped outside, the sound followed me. Not loud, but present, like my body was carrying it. I visited the local historical archive the next morning. The cabin's original owner, a trapper named Elias Rourke, had died here in the 1880s. Cause of death: cardiac failure during a winter storm. They'd found him by the fireplace, sitting upright, hand on his chest. Locals buried him nearby, but the records noted something strange. The coroner's report described an echoing sound persisting from the hearth, rhythmic and warm, for 3 days after discovery. When I returned that evening, the air inside the cabin felt thick, charged with something almost electrical. The heartbeat in the chimney had changed pitch, deeper, slower, resonating like a drum beneath the floorboards. I placed my palm against the wall and felt the faintest vibration pulse through my skin, traveling upward through bone. For a terrifying moment, my own heart faltered and the chimney beat for me. The next morning I woke to silence and dread. The kind that fills a room after a sound has been ripped away. My chest felt heavy, my pulse slow and uncertain, as though something inside me had forgotten the rhythm of being alive. I pressed my fingers to my neck, one beat, then a long pause, another slower. The cabin was learning my pulse, replacing it with its own. I lit a fire to chase the cold, but the flames burned strangely, blue at the edges. The wood snapped once, then went still, as if refusing to make another sound. Heat filled the room, yet I couldn't feel it. The air seemed to move around me, alive in a way that air shouldn't be. Then faintly, it started again. Thud, thud. I realized it wasn't coming from the chimney anymore. It was coming from beneath the floor. Panic clawed up my throat. I grabbed my tools and pried open a plank near the hearth. Beneath it was compacted soil, blackened like old ash, and in the center, impossible, a pulse of light. It glowed faintly with each beat, synchronized perfectly with my slowing heart. I couldn't look away. When I touched it, a shock ran through me, not pain, but memory. I saw flashes: Elias Rourke, the trapper, collapsing by the fire, clutching his chest. The same heartbeat thundering in the same air, and in his final moments the whisper of something ancient and hungry curling from the chimney like smoke. The light flared, then vanished. My chest tightened, lungs refusing to draw breath. I stumbled back, gasping, every nerve screaming. The heartbeat grew louder again, not from the floor, but inside me. It wasn't just mimicking anymore, it had merged. I felt it spreading through my ribs, matching itself to my rhythm until I couldn't tell where I ended and the sound began. Desperate, I stumbled outside, collapsing in the snow. The cold hit me like clarity, pulling my breath back from the edge. The heartbeat dulled but didn't fade. It was still there, distant yet loyal, echoing faintly from the chimney behind me. The cabin exhaled smoke in slow, deliberate pulses. I left everything: the tools, the notes, the fire still burning blue. The heartbeat followed me for miles, soft at first, then settling quietly beneath my own. Even in the city now, I feel it sometimes. A faint, deliberate thud that doesn't belong to me. Doctors say my heart is healthy, though they can't explain the double rhythm they hear on stethoscopes. 2 pulses, slightly out of sync, echoing each other like a duet that never ends. I don't go near fireplaces anymore. Sometimes, when the house settles at night, I hear that faint rhythm hiding behind the walls, patient and kind, as if waiting for me to answer. I know I should be afraid, but I'm not. Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe it's inheritance. Either way, something inside that cabin still beats for me. And when I sleep, it listens for the space between signal that shouldn't exist. The assignment was routine, surveying shortwave interference patterns across the northern range for my research on radio static. But one frequency refused to behave. It pulsed at 19.8 megahertz, steady and deliberate, yet carried no sound. Only perfect, measurable nothing. The closer I drove through the forest, the stronger it became, until my receiver began to tremble with the weight of silence. At the edge of the valley stood a lone cabin, roof half collapsed, wrapped in vines that looked more like veins. The air around it buzzed faintly, though the static in my headset vanished entirely. I turned the dial. Every channel went blank. Silence flooded the frequency band so completely that even white noise was erased. I stepped closer, drawn by instinct rather than curiosity. The forest behind me receded into distance I could no longer hear. Inside, the air felt dense, like stepping underwater. Dust floated in suspended motion, refusing to fall. My radio crackled faintly once, then died. I should have felt fear, but what I felt was pressure. A low vibration, not sound exactly, but presence. I clapped my hands just to prove I could still make noise. The gesture echoed in my bones, not in the room. The cabin swallowed the sound whole, leaving only the residue of motion. I set up my portable transmitter, patching through a backup receiver in the truck. When I tried to broadcast a tone, the output came back inverted, a perfect mirror of silence. The instruments showed movement, yet no audio waveform appeared. Something in that space consumed sound and replaced it with nothingness too absolute to be natural. I stayed longer than I meant to. The stillness was hypnotic, narcotic almost. It felt like standing inside the pause between heartbeats. As night fell, I lit my lantern. Its flame burned steady, not flickering at all, as though air currents themselves refused to exist here. The walls emitted faint pulsing vibrations, too rhythmic to be random. I placed contact microphones against the logs, feeding the input into my recorder. When I played it back, the silence had form. Beneath the void, something shifted, like voices submerged too deep to surface. I slowed the playback, dragging time across the waveform, and then I heard them. Faint at first, distorted by the vacuum, but real. Human. Dozens of voices overlapping, murmuring in a cadence I almost recognized. My skin tightened as I realized the words weren't in any known language, but the emotion was unmistakable. Sorrow, longing, loss. The cabin wasn't empty. It was resonating with grief. I tried to leave then, but outside the forest was impossibly still. Even the snow under my boots refused to crunch. I turned back toward the cabin, and in the window, faint light pulsed in sync with the last beat of static on my receiver. Each pulse whispered the same phrase, though I couldn't tell whether it came from the air or from me. Don't leave us unheard. The forest stayed quiet all night. A hush so deep it seemed to erase my thoughts before I could finish them. The signal still pulsed faintly through my receiver, a heartbeat made of silence. Every few seconds it throbbed against my eardrum like an invisible tide. I sat in the truck, unable to turn it off, unable to drive away. Silence had become sound. By morning, frost had glazed the cabin's windows, each pane fogged from the inside, as though someone had been breathing there all night. I forced myself back through the door, recorder in hand. The air pressed in thick, like velvet soaked in gravity. The microphones began vibrating before I hit record, registering frequencies outside the human range. The screen blinked rapidly, then displayed a waveform, flat at first, then pulsing in a slow, mournful rhythm. When I played it back, I heard my own voice whispering. Not from that moment, but from hours before. My field notes, my mutterings, fragments of memory, all inverted, layered backward like time rewound through sound. Somehow the cabin was recording not noise, but presence. Every vibration, every heartbeat, every hesitation we brought into it. I tried shouting, desperate to hear something alive. The sound hit the walls and died instantly, leaving a hollow ache in its absence. Then, faintly, a voice rose from the silence, not my own. "Stay," it breathed, delicate as static caught between frequencies. "We are the quiet ones." My throat tightened. I backed toward the door, but it wouldn't move. The hinges weren't stuck. They were listening. My receiver flickered again, this time forming coherent patterns, binary bursts that translated into coordinates. Each coordinate corresponded to sites of historical tragedy, avalanche burials, mine collapses, vanished expeditions. Every one of them, when plotted, formed a spiral converging here, at this cabin. It wasn't broadcasting to me. It was collecting from everywhere silence had fallen hardest. The echoes of endings. I pressed my ear to the wall. A low hum vibrated through my skull, deep as ocean pressure. Beneath it were voices, countless and gentle, overlapping in grief too vast to separate. They weren't warning me. They were asking me to remember them. The recorder burned hot in my palm. The silence had mass now, an invisible density warping the air. I stepped outside and turned on my transmitter one last time. Into that dead channel, I whispered the only thing I could. "You're not forgotten." Then I cut the signal. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the static returned, soft but alive, carrying a single tone, rising faintly through the spectrum until it became almost melodic. The forest breathed again. The snow cracked under my boots. I could hear the world. I left the cabin behind, but sometimes when I turn my radio on late at night, the static thins for a moment and I hear the same tone, faint and steady. Not calling, not haunting, just being heard. And in that silence between transmissions, I understand. The world remembers not through sound, but through the quiet that follows. The cabin's blueprints didn't match reality. That's how it began. Just a small inconsistency in a stack of routine files. I was a structural inspector for state properties, and the renovation plans listed a fourth room labeled Guest Suite, 1113 FT, positioned between the kitchen and the back hall. But standing there in person, there was only solid wall. No seams, no door frame, just timber too seamless to question. Still, the numbers didn't lie. Square footage was missing, exactly one room's worth of space. At first, I thought it was an archival error, a drafting oversight from the 1950s when the cabin was built. But when I measured, the interior dimensions didn't add up. Somewhere inside these walls, 143 square feet had vanished. The air in that section felt denser, colder. When I held my breath, I could hear the faintest sound, something like footsteps pacing just beyond the plaster. I knocked on the wall, laughing nervously. Anyone home? The knock came back 2 beats late. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Echo, vibration, rodents. But the delay was too clean, like a voice learning to mimic. The following day, I returned with ground-penetrating radar. The scan revealed voids where there shouldn't be any, pockets of emptiness, rectangular and perfect. My assistant Jenna joked that we'd found a hidden storage room. I didn't tell her the radar also picked up heat signatures. One, stationary, standing right where the missing door should be. We left the cabin before dark, laughing it off, pretending the readings were interference. But when I checked the file later that night, the scan data was corrupted. Only one image survived, a faint outline of a door that wasn't there when we left. And in the corner, a timestamp, 3:17 a.m. The system had run itself while the equipment was off. I drove back the next morning alone. The forest was unnervingly quiet, as if the trees had been listening to something I couldn't hear. Inside the cabin, everything smelled faintly of coffee and warm air, like someone had just been there. On the kitchen table sat 2 mugs, mine and another. Steam curled faintly from both. The wall where the door should have been looked different now. The knots in the wood formed a faint outline, vertical, human-sized. I reached out. The grain felt soft, pliable, as if it were breathing. My hand passed through, and for one suspended heartbeat, the world inverted. Temperature, light, silence. I stumbled backward, half blind. The wall was solid again. But faintly, from the other side, came the sound of a chair scraping against the floor, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps pacing away. I backed toward the exit, unable to blink, unable to breathe. That night, while reviewing the footage from my body cam, I froze the frame at the moment my hand touched the wall. Behind me, inside the room, stood a figure, a man, faint as reflection, head tilted toward me. His outline flickered with warmth. He was Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faint orange glow of that mug, hovering in a room that shouldn't exist. At dawn, I convinced myself it was a glitch, a heat reflection, a trick of overlapping frames. Rational explanations were easier than accepting the impossible. Still, I couldn't let it go. By noon, I was back at the cabin, camera on, recorder running, every instinct screaming to leave. The air inside was wrong again. Too still, too symmetrical. My own footsteps came back delayed, like someone walking beside me half a second out of sync. I set the thermal scanner against the same wall. The screen bloomed red immediately, showing not just one figure now, but 2. Both stationary, both facing me. I called out, "Hello, nothing." Then, faint but unmistakable, the smell of coffee. Not stale, not distant, but fresh. Steam curled upward from the cracks in the floorboards. A whisper of condensation clouded the wood. I pressed my ear to the wall. From inside came a sound that didn't belong to any physical world. Slow, rhythmic breathing. I slammed my fist against the surface. "Who's in there?" The wood flexed, soft as fabric. And then, like a muscle exhaling, the grain split open. Not shattered, not broken, just peeled away. Behind it wasn't insulation or structure, but open air, dim, flickering light from a single lamp. The missing room had appeared, quietly and completely, as if it had always been waiting for permission. I stepped through. The space was warm, impossibly normal. Bed neatly made, chair in the corner, a steaming cup beside a half-open book. But there was movement. The curtain swayed gently despite the absence of wind. A second mug sat across from the first, faint heat signature still rising. "Who are you?" I whispered. A soft knock answered from behind me, the same pattern I'd used days ago. I turned. The doorway was gone. The wall was whole again. Panic flooded through me, but the air felt heavy, thick with quiet. The room wasn't hostile, it was aware. Every step I took, the floor creaked a fraction before my foot touched it, as if anticipating me. On the desk lay a set of blueprints identical to the ones I'd studied before, except this version included a new label, Inspector's Room. I flipped the page. My name was printed beneath the occupancy notes. "Built," it read, "upon confirmation." Something shifted behind the curtain. I froze, heart hammering. A handprint, warm, distinct, appeared on the window pane from the outside, followed by another. Faces pressed against the glass, blurry, flickering like film burning through a projector. One leaned close enough that I could see the faint red glow of eyes reflecting lamplight. I blinked once and they were gone. Then from behind me came the sound of a chair sliding. Someone sat down. I turned. The second mug was empty now. When rescuers arrived 3 days later, they found the cabin untouched. Tools still packed, floor pristine. But the new blueprints on the table showed a fifth room measured perfectly into the walls. On the occupancy list, next to guest suite, someone had written a single word in fresh ink: occupied. It was the kind of story old hikers tell around dying campfires. A lantern in the deep woods that had burned for 100 years without fuel, flickering like a trapped soul against the black pines. I never believed those stories. But when I found the cabin, half buried under moss and snow, I saw the light myself, golden, constant, steady. It shone through a cracked window, unwavering against the wind. I should have turned back. Instead, I opened the door. The air inside was thick with dust, but the glow was clean, pure, almost sacred. The lantern sat on a wooden table, flame hovering in perfect suspension, not fed by wick or oil. It didn't flicker, didn't hiss, didn't consume. It just was. My breath caught when I realized the glass wasn't even warm. It emitted no heat, only illumination, the kind that felt alive, aware. I recorded everything. My instruments showed no energy source, no combustion, no radiation. It defied physics, logic, everything I understood about thermodynamics. Yet beneath the awe, there was something else. A hum, deep and subtle, vibrating through the floorboards. When I knelt to listen, the sound resembled breathing. The journal on the table belonged to a miner, dated 1907. Most of it was rambling, entries about cave collapses, trapped men, dwindling oxygen. But one sentence repeated: "The flame remembers." The final entry described a light that refused to die, one the miners prayed to when they realized no one was coming. "We fed it with hope," he wrote. "It burns for whoever still waits." I didn't sleep that night. The lantern stayed bright, painting the cabin in an amber pulse that reminded me of a heartbeat. Around midnight, the hum beneath the floor grew louder, almost musical. When I stared into the flame, I saw a movement. Faint shadows of people huddled together, whispering prayers beneath collapsing rock. The light seemed to pulse in rhythm with their words. By morning, snow had sealed the door shut. I was trapped. But the lantern burned on, defying exhaustion, burning without air, without time. When I approached it again, something in my chest tightened. My pulse synced to its glow. The longer I stared, the deeper the connection grew, until my vision blurred and the world folded in on that single point of light. I saw the mine. I felt it, the cold, the weight of stone pressing down, the air thinning as voices turned to silence. In that suffocating darkness, one flicker of warmth endured, the same light before me. It didn't burn for survival. It burned for remembrance. When I came to, hours had passed. My camera battery was dead, though the lantern glowed brighter than ever, casting two shadows on the wall. Mine and another, faint but steady, standing beside me. I turned, heart racing. No one was there. But when I looked back, the flame had leaned toward me, stretching upward like it was reaching out. Then it whispered, so softly I almost missed it. You kept the promise. The whisper lingered in the air like smoke that refused to fade. I froze, every rational thought collapsing into silence. The lantern had spoken, if not aloud, then in a way deeper than sound, vibrating straight through my ribs. Its glow had changed too, warmer now, more deliberate, casting ripples across the walls like candlelight underwater. The hum beneath the floor synchronized with it, low and steady, as though something buried deep below was breathing in time with the flame. I reached out, half expecting my hand to pass through light that wasn't real. But the moment my fingertips brushed the glass, I felt warmth, not from heat, but recognition. The flame brightened, and suddenly the cabin wasn't empty anymore. I saw them, ghostly silhouettes of miners crouched against invisible walls, their faces soft with exhaustion, eyes reflecting that same impossible light. They weren't frightening, they were waiting. Are you still here? I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was speaking to. The lantern answered by flickering once like a nod. Then came the sound, the faint clang of metal on stone, echoing up from beneath the floorboards. I knelt, pressing my ear against the wood. The heartbeat I'd mistaken for machinery was back. Faster now, layered with muffled voices. They were singing. No melody I knew, just a slow rhythmic chant, mournful and patient, carrying upward through the grain of the wood. I pried up the boards until a rush of cold air struck my face. Beneath lay a narrow shaft descending into darkness. And far below, faint and golden, burned another light, an echo of the lantern above. For a moment I felt gravity shift, the pull of something old and magnetic tugging me toward that glow. Then I heard it again. The flame remembers. It wasn't memory I felt, it was longing. The air shimmered like breath across glass. My pulse quickened, the lantern's glow pulsing with it, until both rhythms aligned perfectly. I understood then, this was no haunting. It was continuity. The trapped miners had poured their final hopes, their final thoughts, into light itself. The fire became their vessel, a perfect energy, warmth that didn't fade, devotion that couldn't die. I replaced the floorboard, whispering into the air, rest now. But the flame only steadied, burning with quiet strength. I realized rest wasn't the point. It didn't want peace, it wanted witness. When the rescue team found me 2 days later, the storm had cleared. My radio was dead, my camera frozen solid, but the lantern still burned untouched. They tested it, measured it, dismantled it piece by piece. There was no fuel source, no battery, no mechanism. Yet when they reassembled it, the flame reignited as if by memory alone. Sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I see that same golden pulse behind my eyelids. I used to think it was afterimage, but now I know better. It's the lantern, burning still, somewhere deep in the earth, fueled by the last warmth of those who refused to be forgotten. I was only its witness. The flame never died because remembrance once lived. It found me. Months of research had drawn strange constellations across my maps. Coordinates from old ranger logs, vanished settlements, and unmarked survey notes that all formed a perfect circle around one blank patch of wilderness. No trails, no satellite data, not even topographic relief. Just an expanse of white, as though cartographers had agreed that this place should remain untold. At the center of that void sat a single symbol, a tiny black square. The night before I left, my compass began to drift. Even indoors, the needle trembled, spinning every few seconds toward that blank space on the map. I should have recognized that as warning, but curiosity is a gravity stronger than fear. I packed my gear, followed the broken forest roads north, and crossed the threshold where signal and sound both faded into static. The forest grew stranger as I climbed, trees too evenly spaced, roots twisting like written script across the ground. My GPS cycled through coordinates that didn't exist, displaying decimals rearranging themselves like sentences trying to form. By the second day, the world felt thinner, as if I were walking through someone else's memory. When I finally found the clearing, I didn't feel relief, only inevitability. The cabin waited there, small, symmetrical, built from the same gray timber that every legend seemed to describe. The roof sagged under years of snow, yet the air shimmered faintly around it, a mirage made solid. My compass needle froze dead center. North, south, east, west, everything pointed here. I stepped onto the porch. The boards were warm despite the frost. There was no lock, no latch, just a door that opened as if expecting me. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old pages. Shelves lined the walls, filled not with books but with journals. Dozens of them, each bound in rough hide, each marked with a familiar name: rangers, hikers, scientists. People I had read about in reports. People who had vanished. On the desk sat a fresh notebook. Its cover was blank except for one faint line embossed across it. Begin where you ended. My hand shook as I opened it. The first page was already written, in my handwriting. Day 1, reached the perimeter, cabin located, structure stable. Feels familiar, I hadn't written it, not yet. Wind sighed through the open doorway, rustling pages in unison, a paper heartbeat echoing through the room. Every journal whispered faintly when touched, as though the ink itself remembered voices. I read one, an entry from a surveyor dated 1946. It described arriving here and finding the same room, the same desk, the same blank book waiting. The entry ended abruptly with 3 words. It's writing back. As I turned the page, my own pen, lying still on the table, rolled once, leaving a single word across the blank sheet. Continue. The word shimmered for a moment, as though wet with thought, before drying into permanence. Continue. I picked up the pen, hand trembling. When I tried to write my name, the ink flowed in perfect rhythm with a memory I hadn't yet lived. Each line appeared before I finished it, sentences writing themselves faster than I could think them. They weren't random. They were mine, phrases I'd used in field notes, thoughts I hadn't yet formed, fears I hadn't yet confessed. The cabin wasn't haunted. It was predictive, a mirror that wrote forward in time. Outside, snow had begun to fall, flakes spiraling unnaturally, descending in loops that never touched the ground. My compass spun wildly again, then froze, pointing not north but straight at the journal in my hands. I realized what the circle on the map meant. Every missing person, every anomaly I'd traced had been orbiting this place, returning to it like filings to a magnetic heart. I flipped through the older journals. Their handwriting evolved subtly across decades, shifting through centuries, same cadence, same phrasing, as though the cabin had been teaching people how to write in its language. One entry from 1891 ended mid-sentence, "We are its pen." The lantern on the desk flickered, casting looping shadows across the floor. For an instant I saw movement, shapes forming out of darkness, outlines of people bending over invisible desks, each scribbling furiously, all synchronized. Dozens of writers, their faces blurred, moving with the same rhythm as mine. The whisper of pen on paper filled the cabin like rain. I wanted to scream, but when I opened my mouth, words poured out, not sound, ink. The walls absorbed it. Every exhale, every heartbeat became text etched into wood grain. My thoughts weren't private anymore. They were being archived, translated into stories that belonged to the cabin. I tried to run, but the door had sealed, breathing slowly, wood shifting like a living muscle. I turned back to the notebook. The next page had already filled itself. You leave when you finish writing. My pulse quickened. There was only one blank page left. I wrote whatever came, memories, apologies, questions. When I reached the bottom, I hesitated, pen hovering above the final line. The page stayed empty. Then, slowly, new words appeared, not from my hand, but from the cabin itself. "Tonight," Dread Scribe writes again. A faint vibration moved through the floorboards, a heartbeat shared between ink and timber. The journals on the shelves fluttered open like wings, pages glowing faintly in unison. My reflection appeared in the window, and behind it others, hundreds of faint faces, watching through the glass from within the wood. I understood then. Every person who ever reached this place became part of its memory, their stories feeding it, their words keeping it alive. When I finally stepped outside, the world was blank. The forest, the snow, even the horizon, all erased. Only the cabin remained, its windows pulsing softly with light, breathing in stories and exhaling silence. I still don't know if I escaped or simply turned the page, but somewhere inside that circle of woods, ink is still drying, and the cabin is waiting for whoever comes next to write what I've left unfinished. Subscribe, if you dare.